The desert was quiet, too quiet for a man who had lost everything but the beat of his own heart and the tired lungs of his last horse. Dawn had not yet touched the horizon, but the air shimmered with heat, promising another day of merciless sun. His lips were cracked, his muscles raw, his thoughts breaking under the weight of silence. And yet, in the midst of all that hopelessness, he found her. A girl, if she could be called that, collapsed in the sand as though the desert itself had tried to swallow her alive. Her skin was not the color of any human flesh, it was the green of jade in moonlight, streaked with dust and blood. Her hair spilled like silver threads across her shoulders, tangling in the grit, catching faint glimmers of stars that still clung stubbornly to the sky. She should have been terrifying, otherworldly, an omen of madness. Instead, she was heartbreakingly fragile. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. Her eyes fluttered as if fighting to open, as though just seeing the world one more time would demand all she had left. He dropped to his knees, the sand burning against bare skin, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, his hands shook. He pressed his palm to her throat, desperate for the faintest sign of life. There it was, a pulse weak but defiant, like the faintest whisper of music in a storm. His horse, the only companion who had followed him through every battlefield, every exile, shifted behind him, hooves grinding softly against the sand. The soldier turned his head, staring into those dark, liquid eyes. The horse was exhausted, ribs jutting beneath a once strong frame. It couldn't carry both him and the wounded stranger. Not across this desert. Not to safety. Not if there was any chance at all. The decision struck him harder than a bullet ever had. He felt it in his gut, heavy, final. His last hope of survival stood behind him on trembling legs. And yet, as he looked at the alien girl, her breath shallow, her skin burning with fever, something inside him moved. A thread pulled tight. He could not leave her. Even if it meant his end. He untied the reins with hands steadier than he felt. "She needs you more than I do," he whispered, his voice cracked and raw. The horse whickered softly, lowering its head as though it understood. He looped the reins gently around her wrist, pressing her hand to the warm leather, and something in her fingers twitched in response. For the first time in endless nights of silence, his chest swelled with something dangerous, something like hope. He lifted her, slow and careful, feeling her body tremble against his arms. She was light, far too light, as though hunger and wounds had carved her down to nothing. Yet even in her weakness, there was an aura that unsettled him. He had fought enemies with fire in their eyes, men who laughed at death, but this was different. This girl radiated both fragility and power, as if even broken she carried secrets too great for him to understand. He secured her on the horse's back, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years. Gentle words. Words of comfort. His throat ached around them. His horse shifted again, looking back at him, waiting. He touched its maner, breathing deep. "Go," he said, and the word almost split him in two. The horse obeyed, stepping forward with his burden, carrying away the one chance he might have had at survival. And then he was alone. Alone with the desert, alone with silence, alone with a choice he could never take back. He sank into the sand, his arms trembling, his head falling forward. For a moment, he thought he might break. That all the miles and all the pain had finally caught him. But when he raised his head, when he saw her fingers clinging faintly to the reins, her face tilting toward him even in unconsciousness, he knew. He had not given his life away. He had given it to her. And he didn't even know her name. The night stretched on, the stars fading one by one, until only the faint blush of dawn bled across the horizon. He walked beside the horse, steadying her body with his hand, every step dragging like iron shackles. His mind swirled with questions, every one darker than the last. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone, wounded, in a desert where no living thing survived for long? And why did his heart race every time her lashes fluttered, every time her breath caught as though she were fighting nightmares he could never see? Hours passed like years. He nearly stumbled more than once, but each time he looked at her, each time her fingers shifted against the reins as if clinging to life, he kept going. The sun rose higher, gold bleeding into white, heat shimmering on the horizon. His throat burned with thirst, but he pressed the last drops of his water to her lips, watching her swallow faintly. Her skin was too hot beneath his hand, fever clawing at her. And yet, she stirred. Slowly. As though from a great distance, her eyes began to open. When those eyes found his, he froze. They were like no eyes he had ever known, luminous, layered, impossibly deep. Not the eyes of a dying girl, but of something greater, something eternal. She blinked, her lips parting, but no words came. Only the faintest sound, a breath, a whisper too broken to understand. He leaned closer, every nerve alive, every heartbeat thundering. Her hand rose, trembling, brushing against his arm as though she needed him to anchor her to this world. He caught her hand, pressing it against his chest. "You're safe," he whispered, though he didn't know if that was true. "You're safe with me." Her fingers curled weakly into the fabric of his shirt, and he swore he saw relief in her eyes. Not just relief. Something else. Recognition, maybe. As if she had been waiting for him all along. A shiver raced down his spine. The desert stretched empty and endless around them, but he felt the weight of unseen eyes. The silence grew heavier, thicker, as though the very air waited for something to break it. And deep down, beneath his exhaustion and fear, he knew this was only the beginning. The first rays of sunrise painted the desert in fire. Gold bled into crimson across the dunes, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He walked beside the horse, keeping her upright, watching her chest rise with uneven breaths. Her silver hair caught the light, and for a moment she looked less like a broken wanderer and more like a vision, fragile, holy, too unreal for a man like him to touch. Yet his hand never left her arm, steadying her, grounding her. By the time the sun was fully above the horizon, her lips parted. A whisper, rough and thin, broke the silence. He leaned in, desperate to hear. "Why?" Her voice was soft, trembling, yet every syllable struck him like a hammer. She spoke with an accent he didn't recognize, lilting, melodic even in weakness. He hesitated, unsure if she spoke to him or to some memory still clinging to her. "Why give a horse?" she asked again, her glowing eyes catching his. He stopped walking, staring at her. His throat tightened. The words felt foolish even before they left his mouth. "Because you needed it more than I did." She blinked, her lashes heavy with exhaustion, but in her gaze was something fierce, something he didn't expect. "Fool," she murmured, and a faint smile ghosted her lips, breaking him in ways he couldn't name. He laughed under his breath, a sound rusty with disuse. "Maybe I am." They pressed onward. Hours passed beneath the punishing sun, but each step felt less lonely with her eyes following him. At one point, when she swayed too far, he caught her, pulling her against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, her breath hot against his skin. He froze, torn between instinct to let her rest and the dangerous warmth pooling in his chest. He had not held another being this close in years, not since the war, not since loss hollowed him out. Now, with her pressed against him, he felt something like life stirring again. "Name," she whispered, not opening her eyes. "Tell me, your name." He swallowed hard. "Elias," he said after a long silence. The sound of it startled him. It had been years since he'd spoken his name to anyone, as though it had ceased to matter. But when her lips curved faintly, repeating it, Elias, he felt reborn. "And you?" he asked softly. She stirred, her voice like a broken chord. "Celiane." The name lingered between them, heavy, beautiful. He whispered it once, then again, as though testing it against his tongue, and each time she relaxed further into him. The desert was still, unnaturally so. No wind, no bird, no sound but the shuffle of hooves and the thrum of their breathing. Elias kept glancing around, uneasy. He knew silence, he had marched through battlefields so hushed even ghosts dared not breathe. But this silence was alive, pressing in from all sides. He wondered if she felt it too. That night, when the sun died and shadows stretched like claws, he found a sheltered ridge to rest. The horse lowered itself wearily, and Celiane lay across the sand with her head cradled against his pack. He crouched beside her, watching her face in the silver wash of starlight. Her fever hadn't broken. Sweat dampened her hair, her lips trembled with words unspoken. He poured the last of his water into his palm and brushed it against her mouth. She swallowed, eyes fluttering open. "Your world," she said weakly, her gaze searching his face. It is cruel. He let out a bitter chuckle. You're not wrong. Her hand lifted, barely, trembling as she touched his jaw. But you, not cruel. The words melted him from the inside. No one had ever said such a thing to him, not when blood stained his hands, not when his own people had abandoned him. Yet here she was wounded, dying, and still able to look at him as though he were something worth saving. He leaned closer, his breath mingling with hers, his chest aching with everything he could not say. But before words could form, she slipped into unconsciousness again, leaving him restless in the silence. He stayed awake all night, keeping vigil, watching the stars burn out one by one. When dawn returned, it came with a weight he could not explain. The desert stretched empty around them, but the silence was different now. It was not absence. It was presence. Something was here. Watching. Waiting. Celiane stirred as the first rays touched her skin. Her eyes opened, clearer than before, and she whispered a single word, sisters. The air shifted. Elias froze. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, shadows dancing on the dunes. But then he saw them, figures emerging from the horizon, their movements fluid, silent, deliberate. 3 of them. Tall, cloaked in silver fabric that shimmered like water, their skin the same luminous jade as hers, their hair long and flowing like molten light. They approached without sound, their eyes fixed on him. Elias's breath caught in his chest. His instincts screamed danger, yet his body would not move. The sisters came to a stop a few paces away, standing in a line like sentinels. Not a word passed their lips. They simply stared, first at Celiane, then at him. Their silence was not empty. It was judgment. Celiane struggled upright, leaning against the horse for support. She raised her hand toward them, her voice breaking. He saved me. Her words echoed in the morning air, fragile yet defiant. The sisters exchanged glances, unreadable, then turned their gaze back to Elias. He gripped the strap of his pack, heart pounding. Every nerve screamed he was standing before something far greater than himself. Yet when their eyes pinned him, cold and unyielding, he didn't look away. The desert wind rose suddenly, carrying sand across the air, and in that shifting silence, Elias understood one thing: his choice had bound him to her. And now, to them. The desert morning burned brighter, but the sisters' presence seemed to dim the sun itself. They stood like statues carved of moonlight and jade, their silence heavier than any words. Elias felt their eyes pierce him, stripping him down to the bone. He had faced generals, killers, entire armies, yet none had unsettled him like this wordless tribunal. Celiane swayed, clutching the horse's maner for balance. Her lips parted, whispering in a tongue Elias didn't understand. The sound was soft, melodic, yet urgent. The sisters tilted their heads, their expressions finally shifting. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. She was beautiful in a way that was not human, sharp, flawless, dangerous. Her silver hair trailed like liquid over her shoulders, and her gaze lingered on Elias as if measuring the weight of his soul. You gave, she said at last, her voice low and resonant, each syllable rippling through the air. Why? Elias's throat was dry. The word felt like an accusation, not a question. He looked at Celiane, her eyes pleading, then back at the tall sister. Because she needed me, he said quietly. Because I couldn't leave her to die. The sister's eyes narrowed. Another stepped forward, smaller but no less fierce. Human men do not give without taking. Her words were sharper, a knife wrapped in silk. What do you seek in return? Elias swallowed, pulse hammering. He had no clever answer, no practiced lie. Nothing, he said, though his chest ached as he glanced at Celiane. I only wanted her to live. The sisters exchanged glances, their silence like a secret conversation. Celiane reached for him suddenly, her hand trembling but firm as it caught his wrist. He is not like them, she said, her voice growing stronger. He saved me. He carried me. He gave everything when he had nothing. Her words should have comforted him, but instead they cut deeper. He had done all those things, yes, but not for some noble cause. Not because of duty. He had done it because of her, because when he looked at her, he felt alive again. The tall sister studied the way Celiane clung to him, the unspoken language between them. Something flickered in her eyes, pity, or anger, he couldn't tell. "You have bound yourself," she said to Celiane, her tone unreadable. "And you have bound him." Elias's chest tightened. Bound? What did that mean? They traveled in uneasy silence that day, the sisters surrounding them like shadows. Elias felt like a prisoner being escorted to judgment. Celiane leaned against him as they walked, her strength slowly returning, but her eyes held a storm he couldn't read. He wanted to ask her what would happen, what her sisters intended, but the words caught in his throat. He feared the answer. That night, beneath a silver moon, they made camp by a ridge. The sisters spoke little, though Elias caught them watching him when they thought he wasn't looking. Celiane lay beside him, her hand finding his as though to anchor herself. He squeezed gently, drawing her closer. "You shouldn't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Shouldn't what?" Her eyes glimmered in the moonlight. "Hold me. Want me. It is dangerous." He exhaled, a bitter laugh escaping. "It's too late for that." Her lips parted, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. She pressed her forehead against his chest, her breath unsteady. "I dreamed of you," she said faintly. "Before I met you. I thought it was madness. A soldier with sorrow in his eyes, walking through endless sand. And now you are here." Elias's heart stuttered. He closed his arms around her, as though holding her might keep the universe from pulling them apart. "Then maybe it wasn't madness," he whispered into her hair. For a brief, fragile span of moments, the world melted away. It was just them, the soldier who had nothing, and the alien girl who had been dying in the sand. They fit together as though some cruel fate had stitched their souls long before they had met. But fate is never kind for long. One of the sisters approached silently, her steps like the whisper of silk. Elias stiffened as her shadow fell across them. Her voice was quiet, but laced with iron. "At dawn, you will be tested." Elias turned, his jaw tight. "Tested how?" Her gaze was cold, unyielding. "If you are unworthy, you die. If you fail, she dies with you." Celiane gasped, clinging to him tighter. "No," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "He has already proven." The sister raised a hand, silencing her. "It is not for you to decide." She looked down at Elias, her expression unreadable. "At dawn, we will see if your heart is true. If it is not, your sacrifice ends here." Then she stepped back into the shadows, leaving the weight of her words crushing them both. Elias held Celiane closer, his chest a battlefield of fear and determination. She trembled against him, whispering his name like a prayer. He kissed her hair, his voice raw. "No matter what they ask, no matter what they demand, I won't let you go." But deep in the silence of the desert, he wondered what kind of test awaited him, and whether love alone could be enough to survive it. The moon climbed higher, the sisters kept their silent watch, and Elias closed his eyes, knowing dawn would bring either salvation or doom. The desert was pale with the first light of dawn, the air cool yet sharp, as if the world itself had sharpened its edge for what was about to come. Elias stood in the sand, his chest rising with slow, steady breaths. Celiane clung to him until the last moment, her fingers digging into his sleeve, her luminous eyes brimming with fear. He kissed her knuckles, holding her gaze as though to promise her he would not break. The sisters circled them in silence. Their silver garments glowed faintly, catching the sun's newborn fire, and their eyes burned with unreadable judgment. At last, the tallest of them spoke. "The test begins." Her voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "If his heart is false, if his love is shallow, then he shall perish. And you with him." Elias tightened his grip on Celiane's hand, but the sisters stepped between them, prying her away. She cried out, reaching for him, but the touch was gone, and he felt her absence like a wound. He wanted to fight, to claw his way back to her, but something greater pinned him in place. His knees buckled as the world spun. Suddenly the desert was gone. He stood in darkness, surrounded by visions. His old life unfolded around him, his comrades in arms, the war that had consumed him, the burning of villages, the screams that had stained his soul. He saw himself walking away from battlefields littered with the dead, saw the eyes of those he could not save. The voice of the second sister whispered through the dark. This is your truth. Blood and ash. Do you think yourself worthy of love? Elias clenched his fists, shame crashing over him. He wanted to run, to deny it, but he forced himself to face the specters. I am not worthy, he whispered. His voice trembled, but he held steady. But she sees something in me. And I will not betray that. The visions shattered like glass. He was thrust into another trial. Celiane stood before him, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears. Behind her stretched a different world, a lush alien city, silver towers rising into the clouds, her people alive and waiting. She held out her hand. Stay with me, she pleaded. But only if you abandon who you are. Leave your past. Leave your humanity. Become one of us. The temptation coiled around him. A chance to escape his scars, to bury the man who had suffered too long. He could have her, forever, in a place of peace. His chest ached with longing. But he shook his head, his voice rough. If I give up who I am, then it is not me you love. It would be someone else wearing my face. I'd rather die as myself than live as a lie. Her image faded, tears shimmering into light. The third vision came like fire. He stood again in the desert, Celiane on her knees, chains binding her wrists. The sisters' voices thundered. Save yourself. Walk away, and you will live. Stay, and you will suffer and die with her. Elias didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees, pulling at the phantom chains, wrapping his arms around her as if to shield her body with his own. Then let me suffer, he roared into the emptiness. Let me burn. I will not leave her. The world went still. And then he was back. He collapsed to his knees in the real desert, the light of dawn spilling across the dunes. Celiane was there, rushing to him, her hands cupping his face, her voice breaking with relief. Elias. Elias. He clutched her as though he would never let go, his chest heaving, his heart raw and open. The sisters stood in a half circle, their eyes fixed on him. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then the tallest inclined her head, the barest nod, but in it carried a weight of acceptance. He has passed. Celiane sobbed, burying her face in his neck. The sisters turned their gazes away, their silence no longer judgment, but acknowledgement. One of them murmured softly, the bond is true. He may walk with her. Elias held Celiane close, his hand tangled in her silver hair. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her trembling lips, as though to prove to both of them this was real. She whispered his name again and again, each time softer, each time more filled with wonder. The horse stamped the sand nearby, patient and loyal, and for a strange, fleeting moment the desert felt less empty. Elias looked out across the endless horizon and felt something he hadn't in years, not despair, not anger, but purpose. He had given up everything, his survival, his last hope, to save her. And in return, he had found a reason to keep walking. Celiane pressed her hand to his chest, her luminous eyes searching his face. You chose me, she whispered. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. I'll always choose you. The sisters stepped aside, silent sentinels, their gazes softening as they turned toward the horizon. Without words, they began to walk, their forms shimmering in the rising sun. Elias and Celiane followed, her hand locked in his, their shadows stretching long across the sand. The desert had not grown kinder. The world had not grown safer. Yet as dawn burned the sky into gold, Elias knew the truth. He was no longer walking alone. He had given his last horse to a dying girl in the sand. And in return, he had found life again in her eyes, in her touch, in the bond that no trial could sever. The silence of the sisters lingered behind them, but now it felt different. Not threat. Not judgment. Acceptance. Together, they walked into the horizon, the soldier and the alien girl, their hearts bound in a love fierce enough to defy the desert, the dawn, and whatever waited beyond.